Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk Podcast. It's a dedicated show to exploring how and why we collaborate, and we're conversations with experts, real-world stories, practical insights. We break down what makes collaboration work or fail and how to improve it. And this is a great topic. It's something so David and I have been talking for a while. So my guest here, David McCarter, software engineer, author, speaker, and fellow Microsoft MVP. And he is the purveyor of the popular C# Corner podcast, webcast, the show, everything around that. You've been around the space for a long time, David, but welcome.
I have been around this space a long time. Thank you so much for having me back on your podcast.
No, it's great. So this is a topic. So you've written a couple of articles just to set the premise for this. I'm calling this veteran engineers aren't done yet.
Yes.
They're just getting started. And I was thinking about doing a whole Monty Python, I'm not fit yet kind of thing. Anyway, so there's ideas there. But why don't you set us up, like what you wrote about, why you wrote it on these two articles?
Right. So I wrote these two articles called The Untapped Power of Veteran Engineers. There's two parts because I couldn't fit it all into one article. And, these articles really came from, me having a bunch of time to sit around and try to think about, okay, why are all the apps I use not meeting my expectations or my needs, right? And not only apps I use, especially on my Amazon TV, oh my gosh, they're awful, right? And then the other thing because I've been doing mostly contracting since 2012, I guess, why am I seeing worse and worse code in the contracts I see, and not better and better, and this year marks my 20th anniversary of my coding standards book, and one of my goals with that book at least was to, up the game, make quality better, make, .NET code better, make developers better, right? And I'm just not seeing my work paying off. And so I've spent a lot of time and this is, there's many things why I think this is happening, but one of the things I clearly see is the lack of veteran, engineers, and what I call veteran engineers are, pretty much 20, 25 years plus in software engineering. And, so I'm thinking maybe one of the reasons is because, too many teams favor younger, cheaper developers and not favor veteran engineers that might cost a little bit more, right? This, when I was reviewing all this today, it reminded me of a story where, after version 1 of the release of our software, the VP of the team came up to me and said, "Okay, you and you are now hiring. We need this many developers, and they must all be beginners." Right. And I'm sitting there going, oh man, this is not good. And after we went through a bunch of interviews, we couldn't hire anybody, which is actually why I came out with my technical interview book. And we couldn't hire anybody. And I went back to the department head and I said, can I trade 2 beginners for 1 intermediate? And he said, no, must be beginners, right? Because that company, like many companies, they do this butts and seats thing, right? Yep. It's like the mythical man month, which I, say in my article, is they think that there's more people in seats that it's going to get done faster, right? And I've never seen that work. Even at that company, it didn't work, right? And so anyway, I'm just trying to figure out how and start a conversation. One of my goals with this article is not only to start a discussion between veteran engineers and companies, right? But also kind of clue in the younger developers what's coming, right? Because I always knew, software engineering is a young man's game, and that's why I've done everything I can to act younger, look younger, and things like that. But I never imagined how tough it would be now, right? And with all that said, I think from when I started till now, we have a lot more data than when I started about, engineers getting older and doing other things or just moving on to different careers because they can't find a job. right? Many engineers have to move to something else because they flat out can't find a job.
You know,
You know,
I find interesting because I did the whole startup culture in the San Francisco Bay Area for years and had my
yeah,
own
me too.
startups and did, you know, venture capital back startups, and where I in my late 20s, and where I found myself as one of the older you know, people at a
Hmm.
bunch of these companies, including a bunch of the founders that would
Hmm.
go and get millions of years. And my observation there was the ones that actually were successful over time generally brought on mature teams. In fact, a lot of them, when they would go and get knowledgeable, you know, smart money coming in, investing in these, one of the first things they did is said, like, you guys don't know what you're doing. You need to go hire a board and get some adults in the room
Hmm.
that can manage the business side of this, that have that experience. And then you guys can go be creative with your idea.
Hmm.
And so what's interesting is from this, you know, and I know that you talk a little bit about, is that disparity between the engineering, the technical side being younger, and yet you've got the maturity on the business side. Um, and there's that disparity. They don't look at that. It's like, how does the same reasoning not exist on both sides?
Right.
It's true on both sides, technical
Definitely.
and non-technical.
Yes, very, very, very true. And at that same company that wanted butts and seats, I should say that my time ended there abruptly because, one day they decided. So I was a principal software engineer, which is the highest level software engineer, and on top of that, and we will talk about this a little bit later, but 20% of my time was actually earmarked to mentor other people,
Mhm.
which is a great thing,
Yeah.
but. The reason I was outed from that company is because one day they decided to lay off every single principal software engineer in my department, every single one,
Yeah.
you know, because we cost more, right? And I was going, what are you doing? Your products are going to suffer, and they have, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm going for is, companies need to look at, and I say in my article, in the second article, is the experienced veteran engineers should be the last people you're laying off, right? Because we can do it all, right? Besides just bang out code all day, we can do everything else, right? The younger developers can't do that, right? When you do things like that to lay off the more experienced, more expensive engineers, who's mentoring your younger developers?
Yeah.
Nobody, right? And that is huge mistake I see in companies.
Well, it's I mean, another way to think of it too is you think of like you know, globally the most popular sport in the world, football. You look at how building that in America, soccer. I know I'm not a soccer fan, so I don't understand the appeal. But all of my friends now just cringed. All my European friends, especially, that comment. But when you're putting together a team, and you're looking at, you want a blend of
Mm-hmm.
seasoned, experienced athletes, as well as
Yes.
the raw talent coming out that's not proven yet, that's not fully tested, but that could potentially. I mean, that's why you go through that, and you
Mm-hmm.
do some rebuilding, restructuring every year to improve on that. You build a team that way. You don't just go in there and say anybody that's been on the team more than 5 years, you're gone.
Yeah.
All new, fresh
Mm-hmm.
people. It makes me think of the movie The Jerk and Steve Martin. None of this old wine. Bring in some of the brand new, this year's wine. Like, who do they think we are? You know, two
No.
boobs. That's what they think we are. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly
But
right.
yeah,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
you know, but that again, that thinking of, because they've been, I mean, I saw this again and again and again, again, working in the startup world, and they would bring in these young folks. You and
Mm-hmm.
I work very close with Microsoft. They have the same thinking where they
Mm-hmm.
just went through another wave where it wasn't
Yeah.
performance based, and they got rid of 20-year veterans. We're like,
Yes.
how could you get rid of these people
I don't
that were
know.
running your business?
Right.
And they go through and said, well, it's giving other people an opportunity. I said, well, yeah, so it means it's going to be crap for years while you try to figure stuff out.
Right.
Case in point, and I won't out the product team, but I was at a conference in Denver a year and a half ago,
Mm-hmm.
and two of the head of software engineering for a new Microsoft product were there to keynote this event, an exciting new, set of features and this capability. And they're both in their early 20s,
Mhm.
and they're in these senior roles. I'm like, hey, good for you. But I said, that there are major governance holes in your product, massive problems. You're talking about adoption struggles. Like I overheard this discussion. You're talking about this. Um, you know, the reason why is like you guys are not aware of the years that it took us, the last 15 years that I've been working with the other associated technology, SharePoint related stuff. I said that we finally got Microsoft and got things into a way where the governance and compliance, security, kind of all those pieces were in place and solid. You've gone and you've broken all that again. You've reinvented the tire because you've not stopped to take the lessons from the past and incorporate that into your plans for the future capability.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I've been working with Microsoft a long time, and to me, I don't know if everybody else feels like this, but to me, they seem to do that every 5 years. Every 5 years, they have a big reorganization of the company, and they shuffle the teams around, and they lay off people or hire people. They seem to be in this 5-year thing. And that's the other thing is, one of the things I've experienced is it seems like, we're learning software engineering from scratch every 5 years, right? It seems a lot too many companies or people even just throw away everything we've been doing for ages, right?
Yeah.
And oh no, we got to start over and do it all new. And what? And they seem to forget everything, right?
Yeah.
Even down to the basic user experience. To me, that's even getting worse, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the quality of the software, which I focus on a lot, but it's even the user experience just gets worse and worse, right? And it's because of this mentality. You don't keep enough, longer, more experienced engineers who have been through these waves, right? I mean, I was, part of the internet bubble and burst, right?
Yep.
So I've been through all of these different waves, and now we're just on the cusp of the AI wave, which is going to hugely change our industry, right?
Yep.
But it seems like we just throw everything out every 5 years. And when I think about that, I also go, okay, do automakers do that? No, they keep evolving, right? They don't start from scratch every 5 years, and I can keep going on with examples, but I think I made my point and I think it is because of this, get rid of all the older engineers and only hire young engineers with no experience in leading or mentoring or anything.
I know you talk about in your articles about there's the the obviously like the age bias. There's that side of it. There are actually illegal practices there. There are laws against things. They've got to be very careful. Or organizations that are going and doing like senior people. There's there's not. I mean, obviously there are people that are senior are going to be older because they've been in there and have that, but I know that there's ways around that from a legal standpoint. Have you talked to a lot of leaders that think that ageism argument is overstated, or what was the response? What's the response been from like your first article?
I haven't got too much response yet. I'm hoping I'm going to get more now that the two articles which go together. I'll get some more response, but I've heard from engineers, even younger than I, tell me about their experiences, right? And I have this one friend in San Diego who swears to me that, as soon as he gets on the camera and they see his gray hair and his gray beard, it's over, right? And that, of course, is illegal, but we can't prove anything like that, right? Now, he was actually lucky once where somebody, I don't know if this happened in an interview or at his work, but someone said that out loud, that he's too old. And he sued the company and won, right? Yeah. But getting that kind of proof is like near impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for a company you don't know, right?
Well, But so you got to push back on the stereotypes. I mean, one of those is this idea that, again, I've heard this. I've been in those planning meetings when I didn't have any gray hair, but still was one of the older people in the crowd in my early 30s. But I heard them saying, it's like, well, we want straight to college. We don't want them to have any biases. We want to train them on our process, on
Right.
our way of doing things.
I've
And
heard that.
but so there's this idea then, the stereotype that veteran engineers can't keep up, that they can't adapt and change to that model, and then share their knowledge with that. And I've certainly run into some people that it's not just 100% stereotype across that's
Sure.
untrue. There are people that are in their own ways, like, and I don't want to change, that kind of thing. Like, you still need to be and most of these software engineers that I know, certainly in my world and on the business side of things, if you're not staying up to date on the latest technology and processes, and if you're not flexible and adaptable, you're not going to get jobs, period.
That's true. It's very, very true. And you're right. I mean, that stereotype does, I mean, it's actually exists. I mean, there are developers who are like that, right? But my argument in the article is that, and of course, a lot of this article came from me, right? The way that I act, right? And I can't say that everybody out there, every veteran engineer is going to be like me, right? Like, that's not true. But from my standpoint, I've met even younger developers who don't keep up, right? And so my argument is that, you keeping up with technology is really a mindset. It's got nothing to do with age, right? And and for those developers who don't keep up, no matter what age they are, I think a lot of that comes from how they entered their career and their first jobs, and was that instilled in them if they didn't have it already before. I kind of had it from the Navy. I kind of built up that kind of mindset when I served in the Navy. But I really think it's how you started this career and your personality too. And I also think it's companies too are partially to blame for this. It's because, I rarely go, especially now, I rarely go into a company and they pay for continuing education. They don't send their developers to conferences. They don't even encourage them to go to local free events, right? And I know for a fact that, a lot of that is companies are afraid that if the developers actually learn, they're going to go somewhere else.
They'll leave.
Right. And I've said this, written about this before, probably in one of my books, that, they're leaving because they're not learning enough sometimes too, right?
Yeah.
Yes, developers are going to leave. I did a survey once, and on my survey, developers change job every 2 to 5 years. And in my case, it's definitely, I've never worked for a software company longer than 4.5 years. And so they're going to change anyway, right? But, if you're not actively engaging and getting them to learn, instilling that mindset that they need to have, right? Then they're going to leave anyway, right? Yeah. I've seen it happen. I've warned companies, if we don't start mentoring and getting these new programmers straight out of school into more education, like community colleges and things like that, they're going to leave. And it happened every single time. The person I pointed out, they left.
Yeah, I think of like what you can do to maintain people in these roles doing this. I mean, it's me through coming up through the ranks on the project management side and the operations management side of things. It's the same problem. Like people understand that, hey, I need to, rarely am I in a position where I'm going to continue to grow and to learn and to develop my skills and be challenged across the different areas. There's a certain amount of time in that role for what's needed for that function, for that company, where you kind of play it out. You've done all the jobs that could be done there. For you to grow and for you to move up and do other things, you have to move on. Like, so that's understood. But I mean, even Microsoft recognized a few years back that they this idea, kind of the Jack Welch model of constantly turning over your bottom 10%. There's a lot of problems inherent. That was never meant to be a sustainable, ongoing model. It was like after an acquisition, it was a temporary state of things. But again, that idea, they realized that they were losing a lot of senior people because there wasn't a path. It was looked upon negatively when people remained in a group for too long. Well, what if they're just really good at their jobs and they love their job and want to stay doing that? If they're producing and they're hitting all the other metrics, like, why would you go cut that person just because they aged out? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And then you lose all those other benefits, that side of it. I was going to say though, David, like one of the things I'm asked the most, and I know we get this question as MVPs all the time, is how do you keep up? How do you maintain all those things? And that's again where you, especially new MVPs and young people in general, where like they just are overwhelmed with the volume of change, where I've been able to, in my world, consume a heck of a lot more information and stay on top of things, and with the wisdom to know when I'm just going to pass on other ideas and new things. Not effect, don't need to focus on this thing. Here's why, not relevant to my life, to my needs, to what I'm doing. There's ways of consuming information. Again, that just comes with experience, with time, and with that networking.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about we don't keep up and things like that. One of the things I state in the article, and because I kind of did that, is I had this friend was more popular than I was at the time, and he might have been an RD for Microsoft, and he always took the approach of using what works, not the brand new thing, right? And when I was a younger developer, I have to admit, I was going, I don't get that, right? Because I always want to be learning the brand new thing, right?
Right.
But
and then you're chasing half-built, sometimes mostly broken things,
or things that aren't going to last, right? How many things have the Microsoft team has released and doesn't last more than a year or two, right?
Yep.
And so, one of the things I talk about in the article is that, we don't probably learn as much new things anymore because we know what works and we look at the new things and see how to incorporate that into the older things, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
We're not chasing every single fad or framework or whatever's coming out anymore. And I do that, right? A long time ago, I stopped writing, even teaching about things until I went to the Microsoft MVP Summit and I got to talk to the teams of Microsoft, and I would purposely try to find out if they were actually dog fooding their own stuff, right? And those things they were dog fooding, I was go, okay, I could write about that, because if you're dog fooding it, that means it's going to hopefully be around for a while, and you're going to keep making it better because you're actually the consumer, right? And so I think that's where veteran engineers can help is, we'll look at new things, now the AI or whatever, but we need to look at the whole picture as a whole and what's going to sustain for a while, right? I mean, it's too costly for companies to keep rewriting their apps every 5 years.
Right.
That's insane. Right.
You know what makes me just think? I just had a thought here. I like how, so here living in Utah for a couple more weeks here, and they've been very innovative, and they've won a bunch of national awards for. You have like IHC as part of the the hospital system here, the Intermountain Health, and they spearheaded the creation of these IHC sponsored community clinics, and the way that they staff them. So you have like a one doctor, medical doctor on staff. You've got one PA, so the highest level of the nurses. A couple RNs, and then you've got all these other low level. I'm not trying to insult anybody that out there. I've got multiple family members that work in the field and in this space that are nurses and doing that. But anyway, they could drive down the cost by not having it overstaffed with these doctors,
right,
that are passing their time. That it's structured in a way that with the long tail so that you can come in, pay cash. These are people that don't have
Hmm.
insurance or adequate insurance, pay cash for things that could be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars billed through their insurance, where they go pay $40 and have it done here. Like, I know what I'm sick. I need to see a
Hmm.
nurse, get some blood drawn just to ensure, yes, that is what I think it is, and write a prescription for it.
Right.
And now there's even telemedicine models for a lot of that.
Hmm.
So for certain things that they've gone into, they figured out a model for that. Again, you're not getting rid of the experienced engineer. You're
Right.
structuring it in a way that you always have seniority there with that experience.
Mm.
It might be a slightly different role, you know,
Right.
but to structure the team, structure the soccer team um, with the skill set. Sorry, football for the rest of the world, it's just football. Um, but to structure the team that way around the skill set so that you can you've got the experience, they can help nurture and mentor, you know, the younger players that are coming into the system, to the style.
Hmm.
It makes onboarding new people even, you know, faster and healthier if you've got experienced, intermediate, and new people all layered in there. Yeah, I mean, you also, one factor, I want to go through some of the myths really quick. We've got in the few minutes we've got left. It's like, you do address the myth of that experienced engineers always expect top tier pay. I know that's
Right.
always at the top of the list.
Yeah.
What do you say to hiring managers that use that as an excuse?
That that to me is incorrect, especially, now that I'm experiencing, and you know that I just recently moved to the Austin, Texas area, to lower my costs, right? Because California just keeps more and more expensive, and I'm getting older and older, and I knew back in 2006 I would never be able to retire in California, and I started looking for property. The first place I went was Oregon, and so, older, old veteran engineers probably don't have kids at home anymore, so they don't have to pay all that stuff. They're not raising little kids, they're not driving around as much maybe because they have remote jobs. My costs are a lot lower now than when I was married and had two kids, right? So I don't, and now that I'm not in California, that even helps better. So I don't even need to demand crazy pay anymore, right? And that's one of the things I say in the article is, okay, maybe you want some veteran engineers around, but maybe you don't want to pay for that, or whatever. But how about hiring them part time, right?
Yeah.
No, nobody says you have to have somebody there full time. And why not just hire a consultant part time, work 1 or 2 days a week in your company, and so on and so on, and get that experience, especially if you're a smaller, even startup,
Mhm.
right? Uh, why not do that? If you don't want somebody full time around, things like that.
Hey,
Get,
I'm a fractional CMO. That's part of what I do
yeah, yeah,
with multiple clients. Because again, you know, the smaller businesses don't need a full-time CMO.
sure,
You may
sure,
not need the full-time engineer, but if you have somebody that knows the system, knows the process, knows the team, can help with the hiring process, can come in, and even if they were in part-time, I mean, I love the idea of the creative compensation models.
hmm,
You do something where, like you, my expenses are not as high, and
hmm,
I'm more willing to do some creative things where, like, hey, if I really believe in the upward potential of this company, I'll take less pay and higher stock options,
yeah, hmm, sure, yeah,
you know.
exactly. I think we're more willing to look at those things than I was, like, when I was younger, because I was living paycheck to paycheck just like everybody else, and I couldn't say, yeah, I'll take all stock options. That's not going to pay my bills, right? But yeah, yeah, flexible things, and it's one thing I stayed over and over again in the second article. It's being flexible. Companies need to be flexible, and not the hard. We must hire beginners. We must pay only this, or whatever. We need to be flexible, especially this day and age, right? Things have changed the heck of a lot since when I started, and so yeah, being flexible. I think companies need to do that a lot more, right?
What
And
so what roles or responsibilities do companies get wrong with veteran engineers?
um, well, one thing, and I talk about this in the article, that I think a lot of companies scare off veteran engineers with the wording they use in job postings. Fast paced, high energy, long weekends. Nobody my age is going to say, yeah, I want to do that, right? And so I think they actually scare off a lot of potential good, veteran engineers, besides just, looking at their age or how long they've been doing a certain thing. Um, so I think they scare off a lot of good people, and I think companies actively need to purposely hire veteran engineers, right? Make certain roles for them, leadership roles, even dev manager. Dev manager would be a good place, for someone like myself, because I can do more managing, but I still really know the code. I still really know the products. I've been through, all these waves and great projects and not great projects. And I would be an excellent, I've been trying to, apply for dev manager jobs, but I'm not even getting those, right? So I think, the natural progression, like, for example, if you go from junior, intermediate, senior, and then if you go to maybe principal, basically after principal, it's usually dev manager or something like that, right? And one company did ask me a dev manager, and I said no, because, I saw how much my boss worked, you know, midnight, 12, that guy worked 12 plus hours a day and made less money than I. And I said, yeah, why would I do that?
Right.
You know? So I think that's also part of the issue is just, I don't know. I just think most companies look at it the wrong way.
Yeah. Well,
Most that I've worked with, at least. Yeah.
Well, so my final question for you is that can a startup style energy and that senior or veteran experience, can those two things coexist? And what would that culture look like?
I do think they can exist. All companies want things out faster than slower, right? Unfortunately, these companies, many I've worked for, cut corners to make that happen, and everything suffers. Technical debt grows, the code gets worse, so on and so on, right? So I think you can still do the startup culture. And I don't like that word really, because to me, if you're making money, you're not really a startup anymore. So when you go and interview for a company who's been around 5-10 years and they say, yeah, we're a startup culture, and no.
Yeah.
And it actually, a recent job I worked at, very short, they asked me during the interview, do you mind working longer hours when needed? Well, what they really meant was, are you okay with working longer hours all the time? And that to me is just poor management, poor management. I have a really good friend who developed mob programming, and he told me once that if you're working more than 8 hours, you are doing it wrong, right? Something's wrong, right? Your planning is wrong, your expectations are wrong, everything is wrong, and that's why and that's how you burn out people, and that's how we lose the good people, is by burning people out like that. So I think companies need to take a really hard look at themselves, right? And not only change their thought behind, engineers who've been around, longer than, in their 20s, but also look at how their teams are made, and purposely make teams to do this multicultural or age group teams, to bring everybody together, because then everybody will learn, to me.
Yeah.
Right. And if everybody's learns, everybody's happy, and then that just creates better products. I mean,
Right.
I'm convinced of that.
When you have happy people and people are openly collaborating, the quality of what you create improves, period.
Yeah. I've walked into companies, and I do this trick when I do go for interviews. I say, hey, can I get a soda or something? And I do that because they take you back to where people are working, right? And you walk past the desks of the people that are there, right? And I'm remembering this one time I went to this financial company in San Diego, and I did that. They walked me around, everybody looked so depressed. They all were looking down. They all had headphones on. They looked so depressed. I go, yep, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to work at a company that does this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, David, hey, listen, I get to jump. I really appreciate your time on this. I know this is an important topic. I've got so like I went in with your first article. I did kind of a follow up and shared some of my thoughts. Same around the second article. So I'll have links to both of David's articles and my responses to those, because I think this is an important topic for organizations, especially founders. And so I would highly encourage startup founders. And if you're young people straight out of college with an idea, like fantastic. I was one of those. I had business ideas, started, sold a couple companies, and did that all before I was 30 years old. That's fantastic. But I also knew enough of what I didn't know to go and fill my advisory board and hire experienced veteran people all along the way to fill in the gaps. Like I had the energy and the ideas, but I didn't have the experience and the wisdom.
Right.
And so I knew it needed to be a mix of those things. And that was my strategy that worked.
Well, when I got done writing these 2 articles, I decided I want to turn this into a conference talk. So it's actually up on Sessionize now. And I've submitted it to a number of conferences and no one's picked it up yet, but I'm hoping, and I didn't name it this because I want to kind of trick people to come, right? And
yeah,
but I'm there to not only help the engineers, but I also want to help the founders and the companies, succeed in whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, David, really appreciate your time and thanks for joining. Of course, you'll be able to reach out to David. All the contact details that are in both the blog post and out on YouTube. So, and out also on the podcast. So thanks a lot, David, for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the CollabTalk Podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.